where Eastern Washington University is engaging with business and the community, right here in the core of Spokane. I'm David May, Interim President of EWU. I'm pleased to invite you to join us for the next 2 hours as local community leaders from all sectors come together to improve communication and act to solve local issues. I'm pleased to introduce our co-hosts, Sue Lanny Madsen, weekly columnist for the Spokesman Review and other publications, and Jim Wavata, retired environmental planner, union activist, and one-time reporter and editor.
I think that's our cue, Jim.
I think that's our cue.
And now we have a number of guests to introduce to you. We're going to start over to this side. And first we have Chud Wendell of the Hutton Settlement. Next to him is Chris Cargill from the Washington Policy Center.
Nikki Lockwood with the School District, Spokane School District 81 Board of Directors.
And Darren Watkins from Spokane Realtors, Government Affairs.
Pastor Andy Lang from Westminster Congregationalists.
And Phil Tyler from Gonzaga University, not the your security, Gonzaga University Security. And next to him, Craig Meidel from Spokane Chief of Police. So we're well covered for security. Rod Higgins from Spokane Valley City Council, also Deputy Mayor.
Brian Beggs.
You skipped Denny Delwell.
Oh, Denny Delwell, we missed you. Sorry, Denny. Camera wasn't moving. Denny Delwell, retired attorney and retired legislator, too. Brian Beggs, President of the Spokane City Council.
And Susan Schuler, who is the Vice Chair of the Spokane County Republicans. There, we successfully made it through our first assignment.
First assignment done.
So we have a little opening statement we wanted to use. Go ahead.
This live stream is being sponsored
Where's my piece of paper?
by local businessman Michael Gavaracci. Hosted by media is providing the technology that they're using to do this live stream. I'm Jim Wavata. I'm one of two of your moderators for tonight's discussion. I'm a liberal Democrat, a retired environmental planner, you've already heard, and a one-time reporter and editor. Now, Lenny?
Okay. And I am a former Republican candidate for the state legislature and a chair of the Lincoln County Republican Party. So you can see we're on opposite political sides, but Jim has been a frequent responder to my columns in the Spokesman Review, and we've had some really good, engaging, and vigorous discussions, and that's why I asked Jim to join me today when this idea was brought up. So we wanted to start with a couple of opening quotes, and Jim, you get to go first.
My quote is from Marco Rubio. He said this at a public meeting following the Parkland High School, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shootings, when there was a public meeting and people were having trouble being heard. He said, "We are a nation of people that no longer speak to each other. We are a nation of people who have stopped being friends with people because of whom they voted for in the last election. We're a nation of people that have isolated ourselves politically and to a point where discussions like this have become very difficult."
We hope to start a trend.
We hope to start a trend that reverses.
And so I looked up a complimentary quote. This is from Representative Debbie Dingell, Democrat from Michigan. "Too often we retreat to our familiar corners to talk with people who think like us, unwilling to engage with those with different views. Our responsibility in Congress, and I would say in our community, is larger than that. We made an obligation to deliver for those who sent us to Washington. That means working in a bipartisan manner. Unity, not division, makes our country strong." So that's the setting the theme for the evening. We have a resolved statement that we've got up on a whiteboard for everybody to keep in mind as we're having these conversations, and that is resolved. As American citizens, we have a responsibility to make our democratic republic work for all of us. We must find a way to restore public faith in our institutions and our systems of collective decision-making. Even in a fractured media ecosystem, reinforcing our connections to political tribe and clan, we face common problems and must find mutually acceptable solutions. So let's kick it off with a question to the panel.
You bet. The first session is about the media problem that we have, communicating. And so we have a series of questions that we would like to address to people in this panel about that polluted media environment. We've all seen Excuse me. One of the things we want to know is, can we make progress if we can't distinguish fact from fiction? The source of people's media nowadays, a lot of it seems to be from social media rather than the standard old media sources. We'd like to hear from our panel about what they think about this media environment and how we can still negotiate amongst ourselves in a media environment like this.
Yeah, and how do we each of us individually navigate those waters when studies have shown that people 60% of the time they share something on social media because they see a headline, no idea what the story's about. What are some things that you use as you navigate your media ecosystem? And just randomly start. And if we could make one more introduction, we had one person who got to join us a little bit late. If you can flip over there to Yvette. Yvette Joseph is, well, actually, you invited her, but I know Yvette. I've known her for a while because we were both candidates in 2004 in the 7th Legislative District, and we got to chase the ferry at Keller together. So we've met before as well.
Yvette is with the Caldwell Confederated Tribes. She's also, I think, 2019, you were voted into the Native American Hall of Fame.
For her
chairwoman of
our
representing her aunt.
Representing her aunt.
Yeah. So since you just walked in, we're not starting with you. And we'll start over here, and I think we'll put, Ched, I'll put you on the spot. How do you navigate media?
Thank you. Thanks for having us. I think this is a great conversation. I appreciate it. I want to start with an idol of mine. It's my granddad. He started the automotive dealership, Wendell Ford. And what he lived by one thing, and that was empathy. And when he sold cars, he had to relate. He had to connect. He had to find common ground. When a car had broken down and come back in for a repetitive fix, rather than just, saying, right, wrong, we can't fix it, we can't get a part, it was understanding what was the cause, what was it causing their life to change for. And really he taught me the lesson of what empathy looks like, and empathy through education and understanding. And he was fact-based. And rather than jump into emotional response, he would try to connect and relate on an understanding of what the actual issue was. So now he passed before social media. I don't know what he would do in this state now that we're in, because it's so easy to fall in that trap and have emotions run. But I think taking that deep breath and really trying to understand and before you make judgment, and connecting with the issue. And if it's an issue that you think you have an automatic opinion on, it's slow down and understand it a little more, dig into it, educate, and then, share at that point if you really feel it. But, I can more or less, that's sort of the, my driving mentor that gives me that philosophy. So,
Chris, you sometimes are writing in part of the media, as I am. What are the things that you look for when you're looking for media? How do you navigate?
Well, first I want to thank Spokane Talks, and I certainly want to thank everyone who's watching on the live stream. Abraham Lincoln once said, "Don't always believe everything you read on the internet." And I know that because I saw a meme that said that was a quote from Abraham Lincoln on the internet. So I assume that it's true. No, I mean, in reality, you can't always assume that everything you see online is accurate. And so, every morning I read columns and newspapers from all across the political spectrum because I want to get a good idea of what everyone is thinking and what they're pushing forward on. A lot of them I agree with, a lot of them I disagree with. What I don't like is when I see a column or a news report or something that only has one side of the issue in it. I think it's really important to have both sides represented, and sometimes we only see that one side. I'm a broadcasting major from Gonzaga, and I will tell you that I'm a little scared, to be quite frank, about the future of journalism, not because there aren't great people in journalism, but rather because I think that so many of the people now in journalism are the ones straight out of college. They don't necessarily have the experience that older reporters used to have of trying to go out and seek both sides. And I'll just give one example of this, and I'm not going to name the person or the station, but there was a story that was on the air a couple of months ago that was, from my perspective, very one-sided. So I emailed the reporter afterwards, and I said, I just want you to know this is one of the opposite viewpoints from this particular story. The reporter, to her credit, got right back to me and said, oh, thank you for sharing this information. All I did was get this press release, and I just assumed that it was correct. And so I reprinted it, or I reported what they said in the press release. And that's disappointing to me. So, I think part of it is obviously the stories that we're getting from journalism, but I also think we all as citizens have a responsibility to make sure that we're hearing both sides and we're seeking out the truth on both sides. I am not in favor of free speech, I am in favor of free speech. I am not in favor of stifling free speech, and neither is my organization. And I really get nervous about this idea that we need to somehow put restrictions on what people read or write. I think it's a citizen's responsibility to figure out what is the truth.
I was
To
just
what
going to be
extent do you,
methodical.
I'm going to direct this question to Pastor Andy. To what extent do you think some of the communication that's coming out of the cyberspace that incites people to do things, have you had personal experience, for instance, with being targeted by some of that one-sided information that Mr. Cargill was just talking about?
Sure. Correct. Is this? Now it's on. I hope you could hear some of that. But I do think it's work. It takes energy and time, and we can't afford to be lazy. We are a very diverse, but one human family. And even two sides, I'm not sure that it's a matter of one side or the other. I think there's a multiplicity of possibilities in understanding and misunderstanding. And it's not just right, wrong, and it's not just black, white, and it's not just my way or the highway. So I've certainly seen it personally as a pastor in a progressive church in a conservative part of the state of Washington, and it can be extremely hurtful. So a couple things. You need to be fiercely clear, open, and at the same time, sort of understand the preciousness of human beings as we move forward. Nothing fast or easy about it.
Nikki, Spokane School Board has had its round of dealings with having to cope with the consequences of disinformation and misinformation on the internet. What's your experience of that dynamic? And as a group, the school board has seemed to me to dealt with it pretty well. What was the secret?
Boy, it's been a pandemic year, that's for sure. A couple of years. I think, I came into the school board role before that as an organizer. So I was listening to different people where we had shared interest to work on an issue together. And I didn't even ask them about their political, leanings, because I didn't want to know, because we had worked together. And so I really try to respect the personal stories that people share. And I think that as a school board, we have welcomed everybody that wants to engage with us, and we have listened to them respectfully. And we have at times had to push back and ask to be listened to respectfully. But I think that's part of it, is making sure that we are listening to our community. The other part of that is, I think we try as much as we can to consistently communicate what we're doing. And we consistently are following public health guidance, but we just continue to communicate that. And as the public guidance has, changed because of the pandemic and the situations that we find ourselves in, as more information becomes apparent, and we could come back to school in person safely, and we figured that out, we just tried to remain consistent and communicate as much as possible and respect everybody's voices.
I like that word, respect.
I was just going to, thinking of another question, and since we're kind of pointing this direction, directed at Darren, which is, what is, you work in government affairs, so you're always, you're trying to communicate policy issues. What are some questions that you wish you would be asked, so you wouldn't have to push so hard to get a message out? What are some questions you wish you were asked by those policymakers you're talking to?
It comes down to a basic premise, I think, of doing no harm and doing the most good. Those are the two biggest challenges, especially where there are pockets in our current fabric of our society where people are truly suffering. And I don't know that there's a true understanding of that oftentimes. We get isolated so oftentimes in ourselves and our own families. And as a result, the policymakers listen to that. Now, the challenge with policymakers that I've found mostly is that they hear those pockets of people who speak up. But oftentimes, those who are the most vocal represent a small portion, and there's a large portion that are being ignored. So statistics and facts can help to bring to the table. Understanding about issues that we see in Spokane are different than I think perhaps other areas. And I think when it comes to policy questions, finding those solutions necessarily outside the area that have worked there can often be applied here. There's an old quote that I first heard it from Bill Clinton, but it's been repeated about, was that change is extremely difficult because it's the abandonment of what you know for the acceptance of what you don't know. So recognizing that when we ask new things or when we ask new changes, that in fact, for some people is way more terrifying than what we have. We've researched it, we thought it through, we think this is the best policy, but those are sometimes changes hard to take.
I'm looking here at Phil and Craig. From the law enforcement perspective, you guys can flip an imaginary coin between you. Who wants to go first? But I read this morning a really interesting exchange that a response that Andy Billig had made. And unfortunately, he's not able to join us tonight. We had lots of people, dropping in and out of the list for various reasons, but he was not able to join us this evening. But he was talking about the things they're going to look at this legislature about, what they found with an attempt to fix one problem created other problems. Boy, that happens all the time. So what are some things how has the messaging, I guess, if we're going to talk more about communications at this section, the messaging around those law enforcement reforms affected the jobs that each of you do at very different levels, obviously. One chief of the Spokane Police Department and the other at Gonzaga University Security, but how has it affected your jobs? Oh, gotta turn on. Apparently, they're not all on.
Okay.
You guys messed up.
Okay, mine shows it is. So, and I think especially being in my position, I always tell folks, being a chief of police, you have 1 foot in the community, 1 foot in the department as well. excuse me, and you need to find that balance. And you need officers to be motivated, to feel like if they do the right thing, their leadership is going to protect them. But you also need the community to know that we exist to serve you. We don't exist for our own sake of existing. In that if we do have officers that are engaging in behavior they should not be, we will hold them accountable. And I think from law enforcement's perspective is there's a feeling that 99+% go out and do an amazing job every day. That's what they signed up for. We will acknowledge that every profession, every career has the outliers who do things they shouldn't. Some of those are mistakes, some of them are actually misconduct. So to see law enforcement having been painted with this broad brush has been very challenging. Having said that, though, it's also a symptom of a lot of hurt and fear in the community. So it would be easy for law enforcement to go into bunker mode, bristle, and go on the defense. It's not going to be productive. And when you can step back and look at what is the source and the cause of all this emotion, it makes it much easier to work through those and to work with the community on that as well. So, across the nation, I just had a daily news feed today, law enforcement retirement is up over 40% last year from prior years as well. So you do see a lot of law enforcement leaving the profession, but you see even more deciding they're going to stay because they got into it for the right reasons. So speaking to some of the other conversations that have occurred, when we're able to understand where the other person or the other group is coming from, it makes it easier to formulate a response. Now that doesn't mean you're going to necessarily agree with them or share what they're feeling, because you may have different experiences, but at least if you can try to understand those experiences, it certainly makes it a lot easier to sit down and have these conversations and work through these issues.
I just wanted to add one question to that, Chief Idle, and that question is, to what extent do you think social media versus, say, print media is responsible for some of the challenges you face based on people having bad information about what you do?
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. I think a lot of us have heard the phrase keyboard warriors. People will sit at home and they will say things to someone else that they would never say if they were talking to them. It's just so much easier because you don't have to deal with the consequences of whatever you're about to say. And the consequences could just be, maybe a more pointed or heated conversation, or it may not be. So the social media has had a huge impact, and we know that we have a microwave generation. Everyone wants instant answers, instant results, instant gratification, and that social media provides that with just a couple of clicks of the button, and you can have an audience of thousands or tens of thousands with just one click of a button, and you can have one piece of information that spreads like wildfire. And again, going to real quick, I know I'm limited on time. One of the things that I've learned in law enforcement is there's always another side to the coin. There's always another part to the story, regardless of what the situation is. And maybe that will change your perspective, or maybe it won't. And we use that when we get called all the time. The first person we talked to said, so-and-so did this. Your look is like, wow, yeah, it looks like they probably did. But then you go talk to the other person, and you find out, no, that's not what happened. There's another perspective, despite what this person said, and it made sense the first time. And then you talk to witnesses, and you find out what the actual facts are. So there's this thing called due process, and for us, it takes a while. And going to specifically law enforcement, a lot of these tragedies that we've seen across the nation, people want answers and they want resolution right now. And from a law enforcement perspective, it's ingrained into us from day one in the academy. We have due process, and due process happens. It just takes time. It's not that instant gratification everyone wants. And when they don't get that, when we don't get that, it just exacerbates it, because we don't want to wait 2 or 3 months for the investigation. We want answers today. So it's like the perfect storm.
They're not making any noises, so.
It's working. I don't think this is working. Oh, it's working? Oh, very good. I want to first start by thanking you and Spokane Talks for the invitation, thanking Christ Kitchen for the food, wonderful, and UW for their space. I appreciate that. And then before I start, hi Yvette, I haven't seen you for a long time. I love you. I'd like to answer the question not from a perspective of campus security or law enforcement, because communication is communication. One of the things I think that's important to improve communication is to have dialogue such as we're having today, where we come together, a diverse group of people with diverse thoughts, different backgrounds, And hopefully at the end of our time together, we realize that we can have intelligent, respectful, and collaborative conversation. I really believe that in order for us to shift the way we are communicating, we need a PhD. And not that which you get from Eastern or Gonzaga, but a PhD for passion to have dialogue. And when we have a passion to have dialogue, what we do is we separate how we feel from the facts. We put individuals over ideologies. We put people over professions. When we have this passion to have dialogue, we have an ability to let go of that unflinching, dogmatic adherence to our ideology. When we constantly seek certainty for our opinions, our bias, it's this never-ending search. We never come to that resolution. But what we do is we prevent each other from hearing the opposite side, the opposing side of the conversation, and then we're not learning in that conversation. So I don't think that it has anything really to do with profession or politics. Have that conversation with your brother or sister and let go of the thought that your idea, your premise, your program is somehow unassailable and can't be challenged by anyone else.
So
I'd
we're,
like to ask
no, go ahead. I was just going to turn to the same
Oh,
side.
City Councilman, City Council President Brian Beggs, with regard to this respectful communication discussion that we're having, how do we get to that in a public forum, which is very similar in some ways to the internet, where people can kind of randomly come in the public comment period, say whatever they want, so you cut them off, and plant the seed of an idea in the minds of those who are viewing and in the council members who are present. The other question I have is, do you ever feel that any members of the city council are endangered by some of this social media trolling sort of activity?
Sure, thanks for the questions, and thanks to everyone for being here. Every Monday night, it's my job to try to keep a civil discourse at City Council, whether it's an in-person meeting or online meetings. And so I struggle with that. But some of the principles that I feel have been most successful have been, one, to create space for everybody who wants to talk and make sure that they get a chance and that they feel heard and are respected and not dismissed because either a council member or even myself disagrees with them, that they really feel heard as a person. And I think a lot of the passion and their frustration that you see on the internet or you see sometimes in public protests is people not feeling heard and recognized or seen. So as facilitator of meetings, I try to do that best I can, not perfectly, but I think that goes a long way. And even when I'm looking at social media, and I don't look at it that often, but when I see something that really strikes me as non-factual, I try to ask myself, well, why is that person so invested in that? What's going on? Because that will help me represent people from all perspectives. So I just think that's important. And then secondly, when I'm speaking, whether it's to the media or in public, I try to give people a sense of why I'm thinking the way I am and what I'm thinking at the moment, as opposed to, I think so often people just focus on their talking points. There's all sorts of communications professionals that are in the business of giving testifiers talking points and giving leaders talking points. And, there's a place for that. But I think people just want authentically, what are you thinking today and why? And I think that's important. As far as feeling in danger, definitely I talk to my council members. They feel in our particular, we can have well over 100 people. We're up front with no exits, and we do have law enforcement in the room, but they're in the back and very far away from us. And so they're always about those feelings. The issues that are most remarkably and been most passionate have been protests at healthcare clinics and fluoride. Those have been the ones that have really moved people at City Council in the last couple of years. And I haven't felt in fear for myself, but I've had people in my front yard with bullhorns yelling at my kids on the front porch, and which, you know, it's free speech, and I'm also a protector of free speech as a lawyer. But it's disturbing, and there's not the sense that people are seeing me as an individual or my family as just people in this community, and they've sort of taken it to another level, even if they have the right to do it. And so I try to do my best to de-escalate those conversations, but that's just part of being in the public eye.
City council kind of theme, and Rod, give you a chance to speak a bit to what you've observed at council meetings, what kinds of comments, and how is the public communication working for you?
Along the same lines as, along the same lines as Brian, there are people with access to grind. But I discovered quite a while ago, working in a nonprofit, that people who run things are people who, one, show up, two, talk loudly. And one of your jobs as the mediator or the chair of the discussion is to make sure that those don't overpower the entire discussion. Secondly, in the way that we conduct those sorts of things, discussions, is the people who are commenting comment. Nobody on the dais responds. Okay? It's just a free comment. So it's a free shot, basically. And even if someone is, according to the Ninth Circuit decisions on the subject, they can say literally anything they want to. They can be obscene, they can be obnoxious, and on occasion are. And we can't do anything about it unless they're disrupting the meeting, okay? So in light of keeping the meeting going, then you, as the chair, have some control, but not exactly in the public discussion forum, okay? If somebody's getting way far afield, or if they really are starting to attack somebody personally or something like that, yeah, you have certain controls that you can stop. But aside from that, discourse is discourse, and it's free form.
Does it feel productive, or does it just feel like going through the motions sometimes?
Sometimes it can be productive. We had a session the other evening where some new testimony came in that we were not aware of before, okay? That's always refreshing, and we'll go back and re-examine an action that we took. At other times, it will be just grousing about an action that we took that, I'm sorry, but there's no returning from what we did, okay? So it can be cut either way.
Well, it's good to hear that sometimes it's productive, and that we've had Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich join us, and I'll get back to you in a sec. And I'd like you to well, you don't have to literally pass the mic, but generally to Denny Delwo. You've served on a city council as well, and how do you see? I'm assuming that you're paying attention to what's going on with city council meetings now, and how does it compare to when you were serving a number of years ago?
I'd like to think I was on the city council, but my father was, Bob Delwo. Yeah. I was in the Washington State Legislature. But I want to, since you identified me, I wanted to jump in here right now and talk about what I was thinking about when we were discussing this issue. It's more about the polarization of both the voters and the press. And when I first started to run for office about 40 years ago, for the 4th Legislative District, we were asked questions specifically about issues and how it would move the voter, and trying to position yourself in a way that you would be able to obtain their confidence and vote. Recently, we've moved totally away from that, and we end up with polarization where the voters are either in one tribe or the other, Democrat, Republican, red, blue, liberal, conservative. And you know that. If I had a D after my name, I was judged by that, not by my answer to the questions. The newspapers, the press, the mostly radio stations, TV stations, have started to find their place in that, and they attract the voters if they can play the part as the rabble-rouser for the Democrats or for the Republicans. Fox News does it very well for the Republicans. The Daily Show was very good for the Democrats, and you see how they are not necessarily following the truth at every single move, but they're supporting the tribe that they're representing, and that's why they show up. I've got relatives that wouldn't miss Fox because it makes them feel as if the world is going the way they want, or that if it isn't, it's because of those darn Democrats. And we see that on and on again. I wish I could answer your question about the city council, but I do watch it as often as I can, and I'm proud of what Brian does and the other members of the council trying to serve the people of the city of Spokane.
Well, I'm sorry I got you mixed up with your father. Everybody looks alike with a mask on at some point.
Yeah, I'm a Ranger.
And Ozzy, I'm not sure when you joined us. We've just been discussing a little bit in general. What are some things that, and how has the media atmosphere affected your life and how you see the community?
Thank you very much. I got tied up at work, so I apologize for being a little late. The question you ask is about the media. I would have to 100% agree with what Denny just said about the media. They're no longer the conveyors of, here's the facts, ladies and gentlemen, you make up your own opinions. They are trying to set opinions now. It's to the point that I rarely will talk with the media anymore, because I find it, no matter what we say, how we say it, what I say is not going to be in those stories, and the 15 seconds worth of soundbite is not going to be in context to what the question was or what I even had to say. The media has a constitutional protection. Our founding fathers were very wise, and they knew that this republic had to have a free media, a free press. Well, with that great protection comes a great responsibility, and they have abandoned that. That's the reason, if you take a look at the polling, Gallup does a polling of industries in the United States every year. The media sits at the bottom next to Congress, and there's a reason for that.
Listening to you talk about the media and the public's reception, I just happen to have a statistic here from the Pew Research Center. Just after the 26/11, they found that 64% of adults believe fake news stories cause a great deal of confusion, and 23% said they had actually shared a fabricated political story themselves, sometimes by mistake and sometimes intentionally. So you have a responsibility as the sheriff of Spokane County to communicate what the sheriff's department is doing. If you're not talking to the media, how are you getting your word out? And do you think if you're using social media, do you think that diminishes your credibility of your message?
Actually, the social media aspect, as far as the sheriff's office, has done a lot of good in correcting the false news, if you will, the fake news. We take that on all the time. As a matter of fact, we're trying to, and I've had this thought for 10 years, I've just never had the manpower to do it. Dallas PD actually started their own news, and they would put it out to the people, and what they found was the media would just take their feeds and run it anyway. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to inform the public, and social media is a good outlet for us. The media does pick up on our social media presence, our YouTube presence. They do run stories on those, so we're still getting that out. But we're getting out the context, because what you read very much and what you hear in your media and in your newspapers lacks context. And I've had this conversation with the media on multiple occasions. We had a reporter spend about 9 hours in totality on a story with us. At the end of the day, the headline was, Sheriff wants to reduce training for law enforcement. When in fact, we wanted to correct training that's going on. The training that we subscribed to and we proposed would have increased the amount of training for law enforcement officers. And we have a major issue in the state of Washington. It has been found that the basic law enforcement academy curricula is legally indefensible. Now, for every law enforcement CEO in this state, for every city council in this state, for every mayor, commissioner in this state, that means nothing but pure liability. And you'd think that that'd be a major story. The only outlets that have picked that up are national outlets, nothing in this state. USA Today has done 2 stories on that. I've been fighting this issue for 10 years. So I don't have great confidence in the media and social media. I spent the last 2 weeks trying to put down a rampant rumor that the state of Washington was going to come and round up everybody and put them in COVID camps. This is ridiculous, but you would be surprised the number of people, quite frankly, the number of your neighbors that believed that. That is the danger and the power of bad, fake social media, and it is the danger of poor reporting on the media's part that sparked the whole conversation.
That you said that actually remind me of something that Chris Cargill said, which is so many in journalism today who are younger and don't have the context to take a press release and to put it into context. So they repeat what's said. So what you've discovered is that you get better results if you really take hold of that, put out your own media, and rely on it getting picked up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It has been much better for us. I mean, we just had a situation over the weekend where an outlet here locally put out a tweet about our body cameras, how they had been for years trying to talk to us about body cameras, and that we rolled this out and we weren't transparent. And I looked back and I did the research, and when the Board of County Commissioners approved the program back in March, this same outlet did major stories on the fact that they had been approved, that they were going to be put out, the timeline. I'm like, how dare you put a tweet like that out? All you're doing is sensationalizing this now for your own profit and your own benefit, and giving a misinterpretation and a misconception to our public about what actually went on when you actually put it out.
There can be a lot of sensationalizing going on. And by the way, headlines are usually not written by the reporter, just so they can be there's a lot of reporters who get frustrated at how headlines turn around. I'm going to bring Susan and Yvette into the conversation. You've gotten to hear a lot of the questions that we've put out. You can pick whichever question you'd care to comment on.
Okay, all right. I'll bring this over because even on the best of days, people don't speak loud enough. So does that help? Yeah. You can just pass it over again. Yes. Okay. So first of all, I want to recognize what Bill said and to say thank you, because that's what I feel. We miss so much in this country, and I moved out of this country for 7.5 years. I moved to New Zealand because I was really unhappy with the direction the country was going. And I came back almost 2 years ago and quite saddened to see how we just can't talk to each other. There's so much incivility in our country. We don't see each other as neighbors. We don't look to see what is the issue. So, for me and my involvement, it is, what is grounded in respect, what is grounded in accountability, what is grounded in what does my neighbor need, what does my race, religion, none of that matters at the end of the day if we can't look at each other as what does my neighbor, and my neighbor doesn't have to be the person that I live next to. My neighbor at the moment is Brian to my right, and I'm sorry, this lady who's come in, to the meeting. So I think for me, we need to start having authentic conversations around what's the issue. How do we solve the issue in our community? How do we solve the issue in our country? And setting aside, I'm not, yes, in my capacity here this evening, as you introduced me, as Vice Chair of the Spokane County GOP, but I'm an American first. I'm a person who cares first. Thank you.
That round of applause is courtesy of our primary host for the event, whom we will introduce later.
Thank you. And really, if I respect myself, if I respect my neighbor, then I can do my part to make it better. So, I volunteer for Operation Spokane Heroes, which is a program where we help our veterans and their families. And it doesn't matter what walk of life they come from. If they're hurting and they need help, that's what we do. In law enforcement, justice and the law is supposed to be blind, right? Like you help the people who need help. So for me, you asked me, what do I want to talk about tonight? It's about that, but I would also challenge us to invite the young adults in our community into this conversation, because we're almost too old to really understand what they're really up against, and it's not a pretty situation. And a lot of what's happening in our community is because of there's no hope. They don't know where to turn. There is no truth. Where do you find truth? The only truth I feel we find is in having a one-on-one conversation. That's the only way I know that something is true these days. So I'm really genuinely concerned about our young adults and our youth in our community and in our country. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Yvette Joseph. I am a social worker by training. I spent 8 years right out of graduate school, and I spent 8 years working for United States Senate. I worked initially for Senator Dan Evans, and then for Senator Dan Inouye, who were the chair and the vice chair of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. And so locally, probably one of the good things that I have as a feather in my cap is essentially getting the funding, working closely with Tom Foley on the Regional Youth Treatment Center for the Portland area, which is known as the Healing Lodge of the Seven Nations, which is here in Spokane. It's a $7.3 million facility, and it was really, truly my baby, when I worked on the Hill, and I know Denny's familiar with this work. So having worked for two very wonderful and very progressive senators, Dan Evans is a wonderful problem solver. He was fantastic to work for, and he believed in bipartisan solutions, as did Senator Inouye. And they had decided, because Indian Affairs was something that required lots of attention, that they should work together on a bipartisan basis. And so the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs has continued to work on that basis ever since. So they don't have a majority leader or Republican leader. They share joint staff. They work together to solve problems. And to me, that is a large part of the problem today. When you have a Congress who it takes $2,500 a day for a member to run for Congress, actually this was in 2013. In 2013, it cost $14,300 for a man or a woman to run for the Senate, and that's probably double, if not triple, these days. To me, the cash infusion, the corporate influence, the media as well, engagement in the development and policy is what's really tearing the country apart, and it's something that we should be doing something about. The toxicity that we have in the media today is just staggering, but it's so disappointing when we have such a pressing issue like the pandemic ahead of us, and it's been politicized since day one. I mean, there are people probably in this room who are part of the politicization of the pandemic, and that should not be happening, not when we can save lives. And so that, to me, is one of the biggest issues that we should address. But the nice thing about this is that Brennan and I are, we were both delegates for Joe Biden in his election to become president. And since that time, I've been monitoring for the past 2 years, essentially everything about Senator Biden. And having worked with him on the Judiciary Committee on issues related to the crime bill and to the Regional Youth Treatment Center, he's a good person. He's hardworking and he cares about people. And so things aren't really necessarily bipartisan in his way of thinking. It is at the White House, you have to be there, but the thing is, when you read the information that's issued daily from the White House, from the White House website, you see all the things they're doing in the world to address the pandemic. And the Prime Minister of New Zealand is a perfect example of a country that's worked. The same with South Korea, is a country that's worked to eradicate the pandemic, and we should be doing what we can to embrace those qualities. And the national media, when you had a space mission going, wreck, when you've had a death of a key person, when something national and staggering happens where hundreds of people have died, they usually have a national press conference. They have all the media all connected doing updates. And I haven't seen that very often since the pandemic has started. I just really think that we have to have some kind of strategic plan, a declaration with people from New Zealand who were in the same boat that we were in, telling us today what should we be doing to take and help our healthcare providers, to help our policymakers and everyone else. So anyway, that's to me the issue that we need to focus on. And we need to do it on a bipartisan basis. We can't continue to take and politicize the loss of nearly 850,000 people and 65 million people who have the pandemic now. Thank you.
Well, this concludes the first session of our panel discussion this evening. In the next session, we are going to be talking about the issue of homelessness in Spokane.
And the only other thing I was going to say is I'm going to introduce Susan and Yvette to each other
Oh,
because Susan actually lived in New Zealand for 7.5 years. So you might find something. You find common ground. You just have to sit down first and have a conversation. So we'll take a break and we will be back in 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
All right.
Good evening. My name is Mike Gavarecci. I'm the sponsor of this event called Beyond Politics. The purpose of this event, Beyond Politics, is to bring our leaders, policymakers, and other influential people closer so they can discuss problems facing our community without obligation to any political party. Within this forum, we need to emphasize the need for communication and compromise. The goal is to put community first above any political party and agendas. Finally, to encourage our leaders to recognize the path going forward relies on the value of unity and solidarity. This is how we will preserve our freedom and democracy here in our community and beyond. Once again, thank you for being here, and I hope you all have a great evening.
Well, welcome back. We've all taken advantage of the great food that Christ Kitchen has provided for us, and we appreciate them being here to serve. For this session, we've got two of our representatives joining us from Olympia. We have Senator Jeff Holey. I've just advanced you to Senator. We have Jeff Holey and Marcus Riccelli joining us for this session, and we're going to focus on homelessness. And Jim and I were just discussing how we should take good advantage of having their involvement from a legislative perspective.
Yes, we've decided that what we want to do in this session is allow Jeff and Marcus to make some to consider what the state might want to do in relation to homelessness to help people out. And then we would like our panelists here assembled to be able to have an exchange with the two legislators so that they can get some input from this kind of broad-based panel. Since you've got assembled in a room basically people from each end of the political spectrum right towards the middle, we thought it would be an excellent opportunity for you to hear from us about what we think the priorities ought to be regarding homelessness. So
use this room as a focus group for you and kick us off with a little bit of a statement of what are some issues related to homelessness that you see your caucuses working on. And that should give us an opportunity to demonstrate to people how we have a civil discussion with a broad bunch of people over a really tough and complex issue. And I'm going to flip an imaginary coin and decide that, Marcus, you're going first. Marcus, so now we get to say what we've all been saying for 2 years. Unmute.
You're on mute.
There we go.
Hey.
Hey. Perfect. I should have known. Jeff would have been better to go first because, as a former police officer, he would have known red means stop and green means go, and he wouldn't have made that mistake. But it's great to be with you all. I'm actually in Spokane because we're all remote, and we just got off the floor of the house here, passing some bills out. So it's great to be with you. I appreciate all the focus and consideration on affordable housing. We know people won't thrive unless they have a house, a roof over their head. I work part-time in healthcare as well, and we know that people can't recover or we know that housing is a social determinant of health. And so I appreciate all the minds in the room as we look to find policy interventions that will work. One of my frustrations, which I've been, and I don't think it's a partisan issue because I think it's kind of a fail for our community, and I would put myself included in that, is that there was rapid rehousing dollars that the legislature put forward that went out all across our state, and we weren't able to take advantage of those here in Spokane. So we're kind of doubling down and figuring out ways that we could do that if that pot is expanded. That takes, some properties maybe that are hotels that are up for sale or old rental apartments that we could go in with some funding, refurbish, and then make sure we're going to either transitional housing or even housing for some of our folks who are in our workforce, et cetera. And so I'm excited about the prospects. I feel like there's been some more energy around that, understanding that there was this big pot of money that Commerce had, that there might be more dollars, and that they were going to Clark County, King County, Thurston County, and that we didn't quite pull something together. So I really think that some of the folks in the room, some of our elected leaders, if we can come together, that is something I think we could particularly call out in this next session and ensure that some of those dollars come right back here to help provide some of the stock that we need to solve this problem. So that's one thing. I'm on our capital budget. I think continuing to fund the Housing Trust Fund is an important way to continue to expand opportunities for housing in our community and statewide. So I think bolstering the pot of money that can go to that. There's some real interesting proposals out there. One that I'm co-sponsoring that's an Apple Health and Homes type deal that would really look at what some would call a prescription for housing for those folks on Medicaid. And those are folks that are at 138% of the federal poverty level or less. I think we need creative solutions. And so those are a couple of things. I don't know, I want to make sure that I'm being good with the time. So
If
I
you
don't
were in
see
the
a time
room, I'd
limit.
wave at you and say, I need to move on to Jeff.
Yeah,
We
no.
want to make room for you to get some good input from the folks here in the room. So Jeff,
Great.
what would you kick us off with?
Do I have mute off?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for having me tonight. This is a pleasure to actually talk to somebody that's at home versus another lobbyist. It really is pleasant. Marcus just hit it out of the park with that, talking about the Housing Trust Fund. Through some of the skinny budgets we've had over the last 10 years, that has been either depleted or swept a couple of times to the point where it's not effective, and that is the foundation for financing a lot of the local projects out there that are attempting to provide low-income housing where necessary. A couple things come to mind immediately. I'm on the board of SNAP, the Spokane Neighborhood Action Partners, and we're the largest low-income housing provider in the region. I mean, that is an awareness extension after 22 years as a Spokane police officer, about not just the problems I saw, but how to help solve them, and actually how to provide people a hand up as much as a necessary place to live that has some dignity to it and has affordability, which in Spokane over the last 24 to 36 months has become crazy. We've seen our mid 20% increases over the last couple of months, last couple of years for the median closing price in Spokane, apartment vacancies of less than 1% countywide here. So we all understand that these are issues we're going to have to overcome. One of the things I've been involved with here for the last couple of years is a Highland Village project, 1 and 2 in Airway Heights. Section 1 opened up, and I was at a ceremony here a couple of months back that got that online. The problem is just in the last couple of days here, just showing you how bipartisan everything is that we end up doing in this region. We had the housing part 2, the Highland Housing Project part 2. All of a sudden, the Department of Commerce withdrew $3 million in the funding stream. Absolute major gap there that we're trying to figure out how to accomplish. I've reached out to Spokane County Commissioner Josh Kearns, who's assisted me with trying to put together a partnership here, and also talked to the Senate Majority Leader from the 3rd District, Andy Billig, and just to show you how bipartisan everything is. When the elections are over, and all the trash talk is done and the yelling's done, we immediately come together and all that stuff goes back in the closet, and we start to talk about projects working as a team here. Marcus and I have worked on so many things from the Wazoo Med School together, and Andy immediately, Senator Billig immediately came to say that yes, he's interested in working on the Highland project to make sure that we find funding so that is completed. And they've got a wonderful story here in the last couple of months as to the people that have inhabited and some of the help we've provided. And so there's so much to talk about in this issue, but just talking about it locally here, you can know for a fact that everybody in the 3rd, 4th, 7th, 9th, and 6th, we're working as a team for Spokane region here. Partisan politics never comes into it.
One of the things that we've been thinking about here in this room, a couple of us, I'm going to ask Pastor Andy Lang to pose a question to you about how we deal with some of the more emergent issues around homelessness in Spokane.
So, gentlemen, these are great things that you've done, and you're talking about this bipartisan work, which of course we want to hear that. But at the same time, it's another bad winter. And we know that the people on the streets right now are suffering. Westminster was asked on more than one occasion to provide emergency shelter because there's not enough in our city. So we need to believe that you definitely have the best interests of our folks, all of our folks, including our homeless folks, in the work you're doing. And we want to see results sooner because there are people suffering. There are lives literally being lost because of this. We need to be creative, and we want to know what creative work we can help you with, and the sooner the better.
You want me to take, you want to go, Jeff?
Did I take that first,
Go ahead.
Marcus?
Sure, I'm happy to. Probably about 4 years ago, I wrote a letter to our former mayor after visiting the shelters saying, I fully support the idea of a day shelter here, and I would do whatever it takes to get capital funding. And I communicated that to the council as well. So what I'd really like to see is a proposal where we could go and help get that infrastructure set up, including if that means a building or whatnot, where we could help fund the infrastructure, whether that be lockers, whether that be showers, whether that be just a new building from scratch. I'd love to work with the community to come up with a plan. And I've expressed my interests multiple times in saying that, we have this thing through our capital budget, these member requests. I believe that would be a bipartisan effort. We've done that many a times. We've worked on a number of facilities around here where we, from the medical examiner's facility to a whole host of other institutional buildings. Jeff and I just cut ribbon on the this new science building at Eastern, and we see this kind of infrastructure as critical. The operating piece is concerning, and we want to workshop that and figure out how we can access dollars. One of the things that I was concerned, I spoke with Fawn from VOA, and we invested, the state along with many others, into the new Hope House, and hearing from them that they might have an operating shortfall. So I think we're really primed to help deliver on infrastructure, to make sure we have the beds, to make sure that we could potentially have a day shelter. But we also, I think, would go to bat for operating dollars identified where there's shortfalls. So that's where I would start. And I have been a bit frustrated, and it's not pointing fingers at one side or the other or one particular person. And actually, questioning myself, what more can I do to say, like, hey, we will go and help secure. And I'm pretty confident that Jeff would work alongside with me, along with a bunch of other legislators to get that funding.
That brings up one of the questions that I was thinking about with this group here, is that we all bring a context of experiences to questions like this about homelessness. And I know, Pastor Lang, that you have a real heart for the emergent problems that you see right in front of you. And so that's part of what you bring to this conversation. To everyone else, if you would think for a minute, if you would think about contributing, how has homelessness touched your life? How does it affect you, or what has been your past experience? And how does that then shape your approach to discussions of the problem? And Chad, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, because this is something that you've been really seriously dealing with as a property owner, dealing with some of the impacts, but I know that you also you spoke to the empathy that you learned from your grandfather that you see at the other side as well. So how do those experiences shape how you approach discussions of homelessness?
Yeah, thanks for asking the question. Thanks, Representative Holy and Representative Riccelli. Representative Riccelli and I are just going back and forth on the long-term care tax, so hopefully finding solutions there. About a year ago, we came out of 2020 and saw Hutton settlement. We're funded 100% by rental income, we have a portfolio of 22 properties. 20 of those are in the city of Spokane, and 20 of them experienced a considerable amount of increase of property damage, property theft, tenant safety issues, and challenges from what we saw as a transient population. I think it's pretty typical for the business community to sit there and point fingers at the council or the mayor and say, it's your fault, you got to fix it, or it's not your fault, but you need to fix it. We took a different approach, and we went out and we decided we needed to educate ourselves. And so we spent time meeting with the homeless, the different communities. There isn't one community, there is multiple. We did ride-alongs with the police department. We spent time with the providers. We toured 8 different shelters. We talked to elected officials. And then we talked to some other communities and to see what they were doing, what some best practices were, communities that were moving the needle a little bit and addressing it, as well as ones that were challenged with it. And through that, I think what we found was this homeless ecosystem is so complicated. And it starts with the numbers. We don't know what the numbers are. We rely on point in time, one time a year, middle of January. This year, I think it got bumped back a couple months. And my philosophy, going back to my granddad, is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we do not know, and we're not managing it. And I'm with Pastor Casterlang. We left ourselves high and dry again this year with an emergency shelter that opened up at the convention center. Right thing to do at the right time. What do? We've put them back out on the street. We're not ready for it. And I'm going to talk about NIMBYism. That's the other piece of it that we've learned, and that is not in my backyard. 2.5 years ago, the Hutton Settlement had a piece of property, grocery outlet on Sprague and Havana. The Valley was at the table to be talking about how did they participate. The county was ready to participate, and the city was there. They had it tied up. The NIMBYism took over, and it got caught up in the campaign, and the deal blew up. And so we got to get real as a community. We can't say this is not in my backyard. This is our backyard. The whole region's our backyard. And so it is a passionate issue. But I think it's one that we got to understand what the complexities are. And through this, and some of the providers, including Family Promise, VOA that Marcus Rotelli talked about, Catholic Charities, UGM, they all are providing different services. But at some point, we got to know what we're managing, what is the numbers, and where's this return on investment? If we're going to put money into the affordable housing and rapid rehousing, do we know it's working? I don't think we can answer that question. So back to the education piece, I think we all as a community need to understand better, and some of it's being on the streets and talking and having conversations with the people that are hurting, that need our help, and we're letting them down.
Yes, go right ahead.
I really appreciate what Judge's saying, and I want to address it from a transparency standpoint. What we see, we talked about media before we came into this section, and what we see in the media is not helping us to get that opinion that what's going on in our city is right. We see our administration fighting with our council. We see one or the other getting on their soapbox and belittling the other. And that doesn't give its citizens the belief set that they can work together and resolve these problems collaboratively. I think we're pointing the fingers in the wrong direction. Everyone probably in this room and many that are out there listening, including our representatives on video here, know that Spokane, the city of Spokane, is supposed to be addressing this homeless issue through the continuum of care. And that continuum of care is a group of stakeholders that are put together that are supposed to, and I'm going to read you what it says from their website: address homelessness, improve coordination and integration with mainstream resources and other programs targeted to people experiencing homelessness, improve data collection, which our own council president admitted that wasn't very accurate in determining that, and allow communities to tailor the programs to their particular strengths and challenges with that community. Now, how do we know that those resources that Chud is talking about are working if when we look on that agenda that you can go online today and look at, hasn't been updated since July 28th of 2021? How do we know that the continuum of care is working if their minutes haven't been posted and updated since May 26th of 2021? They get hundreds of thousands of dollars in, my friends. They're supposed to be doing the things that Chud just said. They're supposed to be addressing those issues that come up with the climate that they just said, but there's no transparency in their work. There's simply finger pointing going on from one entity to another. And that doesn't help the people that are invisible that I think Sulani addressed. We worry about the chronic homeless, what we see that makes our citizens feel uncomfortable. But let me tell you a story about a friend of ours who has a boyfriend that has 3 children living in an apartment. Their relationship didn't work out, and we're sorry to hear that. But she's not willing to let him and his 3 children go out on the street because he doesn't have a job or a place to go. And so when they reached out to those entities in the community for help, they told him to take his 3 children to a shelter and to be there for up to 3 months, as our representative said, to get that rapid rehousing, when we know there is no money there for him to do that. We want our citizens with children just take a step backward to go into shelter to get help. That's ridiculous.
At this point, we really are looking for some people to pop up with your hand if there's something somebody says that is going to give us and Darren is getting there. And Philip, I think you know, and anybody who's read some of the columns I wrote in 2019, that's, our struggle with my brother-in-law who died homeless. I mean, the frustrations of trying to navigate that system would drive you crazy if you weren't a little off to begin with. So, Darren, what did you have to to add to this.
Well, I can't speak to a number of the issues that are directly, we wouldn't want to start with addictions and those challenges. I wanted to add, though, an overlay that I think it's ignored in the conversations about housing, and that has to do with when it comes to providing housing. I'm talking at all levels. What is the worst state in the country? What's the lowest number of housing units per capita in the entire country? The answer is Washington State. Washington State is to housing what Mississippi is to kids reading. It's that bad. And when you look within the context of Washington State, where is the worst county? And sadly, Spokane is one of the worst counties. So when we talk about problems of where we can address resources, housing, in the words of Jim Frank, may be the greatest issue facing our generation. And every single social ill facing Spokane may actually be tied back to this very singular element. So let's not lose sight of that it has to have a place to be before we can address some of these other as well. And these other issues are very strong. But let's not ignore the key fact that when there is a challenge, it is really, really, really bad in the city of Spokane and Spokane County.
I know that, Darren, you and I have talked before about how it's housing at every level, because that house at maybe the highest level, somebody moves up into that, which leaves space below, which means it makes room in the system at every level.
It's not just buying a home, it's apartments. We have the lowest vacancy rate amongst the country. We have, it is a lack of, and we've got here for all the right reasons. It's like 9 or 10 great ideas that came together to make a bad decision at the end, right? And so, let's not go back and point fingers at what didn't happen, but let's all say, and Spokane has done this. Historically, Spokane has stepped in and done that. We built 18,000 homes in 5 years when veterans didn't have a place to live. I think the time for us is to take that same attitude towards housing and step forward, because clearly it's the greatest need in our community.
Well, you're all thinking of other things you'd like to tell Marcus and Jeff. I want to give them a space, because since you can't raise your hand at me, but I want to make some space for you to ask a question. Do you have a follow-up question for the group?
I have lots of questions, but I spoke last, so I was going to give Jeff the floor.
Yeah. Amen. It's too easy to get into the weeds here. I'd like to hear from Chief Meidel, too, what his thoughts were. I remember what it was like on the street 30 to 40 years ago, and there's always been homeless. Matter of fact, there was a cardboard jungle that was downriver from Spokane Community College there that was just tremendous in size, but they were hidden. They weren't so over it. Now the numbers are overwhelming, and yet the misery is consistent. I can remember during severe winters back in the mid-'80s, when the social network had literally evaporated by the early to mid-'80s, and we had crisis residential center for the kids, detox, or jail were 3 options to place somebody, and we tried everything, and we'd fill those up. We'd be taking people in our cars down to the steam vents next to the city hall, where they had the power plant, the turbines down there, because there was hot steam coming out and they wouldn't freeze at night, and they'd lay on those. It's just, this need has been perpetual. Now it's so great that it's in front of us. Remember that Marcus and I, all your legislators, we're the people, or not the people there with the hammer building the house. We're the people that attempt to provide the funding streams, to set the policies to allow these things to develop and exist, and to attempt to incentivize what we see as need in the community. And we absolutely are doing that, quite frankly, with almost 100,000 people in the 10-year period between censuses. And we're having a hard time, even with SNAP, talking to our executive director, Julie Hohnkamp, we're having a hard time getting a handle on demographics as to who's moving here. It's hard to plan and run in front a little bit here to something that, to go back to a previous statement that was made by Chud Wendell, that, what you can't measure, you can't manage. We're trying awful hard to stay up with it.
Thank you, Senator Holy, for volunteering me to speak. I appreciate that. This is, I'm going to state the obvious. That's one of my superpowers. It is a complicated issue. There's not one lever you can pull that is going to fix this. Housing is important. Having enough housing is not going to fix this. It is an important step, and it's something we need to do, is to have more housing. But on top of the housing, we're struggling with mental health issues. We're struggling with drug addiction. We're struggling with co-occurring issues that people will have mental health issues, and they have to take a cocktail of drugs for their mental health issue. If they miss one dose in the middle of the day, it throws everything off. So it's easier for them to go to the drugs than it is to take a cocktail that has to be taken at the right time throughout the day. And then you have those with the drug issues who, in essence, rewire their brain, and now they have mental health issues. And you have a lack of treatment for those who have co-occurring issues. Typically, if you have someone with a mental health issue and you want to get their medication right, you need to get them off of illicit drugs. Otherwise, there's no sense on giving them medicine for their mental health issue. So treatment for those who have co-occurring issues is very challenging. As in a meeting with former Governor Gregoire last week, and she was talking about San Diego, who had tremendous success in dealing with the homeless. It hasn't obviously completely gone away. It never will. But one of the things she shared was one of the females who'd been living on the street for quite some time, they were able to get her 4 walls, a roof, a nice facility to live in. She stayed there one night, but when she left that camp, her demons went with her. And she woke up the next day and those demons were still there, but her support group that's in that camp was not. So she went back to that camp because that's where her tribe was. So I think we absolutely need housing, but we also need treatment for those who have drug addiction issues, who have mental health issues. And then we need a response for those who just don't want to get better. There needs to be some level of accountability for a certain segment, not everybody, but a certain segment. Law enforcement really is designed to deal with that small segment of the population that is going to victimize the community at some capacity, right? So when something fails, family, school, personal ownership, when something fails, that's where law enforcement comes into this. The sheer quantity, though, that we're seeing out there is more than the capacity of law enforcement to meet that need. So it's just overwhelming out there, and what we deal with every single day is frustrated businesses who have people that are sleeping in their doorway and say some rude things to them in the morning when these employees are trying to get in. They show up every morning to fecal matter, to needles, to waste, to garbage. You have people that are walking around with machetes and bats in downtown. It's not illegal, but nobody wants to walk next to them, especially when they're in a crisis. So it's a complicated issue, and we're not going to fix it with just one lever. But we need to look at it truthfully, holistically. It's housing's good. We absolutely need that. But housing is not in and of itself going to solve this. One of the things I've asked is at what level, when we're getting these concerns, legitimate concerns from businesses, from visitors, from vacationers, at what level do we decide this, and I don't have an answer for you, but as a community, at what level do we say enough? This is the X number of times you've broken this window, you have stolen, you vehicle prowled, you burgled. At what point do we say, right now, we're done? There has to be that level of accountability as well. And I understand accountability is challenging when someone has a drug addiction or mental health issue, but from a law enforcement perspective as well, we're dealing with a lot of the same folks. And it's not just housing, it's got to be a comprehensive approach.
I'm just looking around to see who I make eye contact with who has a comment.
I'd like to also follow on to Darren's comment about affordable housing. I'd like to have maybe Senator Holy, or excuse me, Representative Holy, because you serve on the SNAP board, talk to us a little bit about what constitutes affordable housing for someone who's homeless right now living on the street. They can't make a rent payment of even $300 or $400 a month. What about that group of people? How do we start them on the chain away from homelessness and into housing? From the perspective of a SNAP board member.
That is the question. The issue is that you can't push a rope. A lot of times you can show people the opportunity, you can provide them access, you can provide all the resources, anything from mental health services out there to drug rehabilitation, inpatient services. We've got a couple of facilities in Spokane that are state contract hospitals for inpatients that are non-Department of Corrections. We've got so many resources, and yet at the same time, there's people that rail at the idea of even temporary shelter because it's what they call filtered. In other words, you can't be obviously drunk or high or used in the facilities. They have there's people I run into years ago that choose not to avail themselves of the resources that are there and do it intentionally because they want to live on the street. I mean, there's such a wide variety of reasons. One of the things that struck me about 15 years ago, 20 years ago here, was when methamphetamine started to take hold. And we'd end up arresting somebody for a burglary or a theft and talk to them, and they're extremely literate. And you'd say, where are you from? And you pick on them. And they ended up having an undergraduate degree. They'd end up working in a professional job, and it had taken 6 months, and all of a sudden they're divorced, their kids are taken away, the job's gone, they're living on the street. There are so many drivers to this problem. I guess, again, we're back to finding out what it takes to provide what's necessary to attract them to avail themselves of the resources in the system. And you're absolutely right. You're gospel right on the fact that we don't have an answer for one size fits all. We don't have the solution for the people that are on the street versus the people that don't want to be on the street but are addicted versus the people that fell into a bottle versus the people that can afford subsidization, low income housing, and to prioritize. The funny part is just to reflect real briefly. When I talked about the $3 million that Commerce had taken out of the funding stream for the Highland Village Project Part 2, the logic they gave us was that they're reprioritizing their legislative priorities. Now, you see what we're dealing with the abstract out there, trying to figure out exactly how to apply what resources we can, what we can depend upon. This is kind of why I asked Chief Meidel to address that issue, because I knew exactly where he'd go. He'd be talking about the realities of why people are on the street and the issues they have to face, and how we actually have to find a solution for one size fits all. It's rather hard to do.
Jeff, I've got, Brian Beggs has got some comments that he'd like to add as well, because this is an issue that he's been dealing with for a number of years.
I just wanted to ask both of you about the new drug treatment money. So last year, the Supreme Court threw everybody a curveball when they struck down the drug possession laws, and you all responded and gave cities the opportunity to impose their own drug possession laws, which we did in Spokane last year. But at the same time, my understanding is you approved a lot more money for drug treatment. And my friends at Downtown Spokane Partnership told me that if I ever get to talk to a legislator, ask, when is that coming and how is that going to be? Putting aside people who aren't ready for treatment, there are lots of people that are ready for treatment and aren't able to find a bed. So I'm just wondering what you know about the rollout of that. I know it takes a long time from appropriation to implementation, but anything you can tell us about that?
Marcus, you could take one.
Yeah, sure. And I do actually have some questions as well. Lonnie said to maybe post to the group where we're looking for some help. I think it's that implementation stage and getting the dollars out. I mean, we'll have to talk offline about how that is going. I mean, sometimes things move slower than we'd like. I think part of it is just the actual capital facilities and the beds. We're doing some unique things here. The county and city and the community led on jail diversion and looking at opportunities where we can get people that treatment that they need and have a chance to seek help for co-occurring substance abuse and mental health disorder and things like that. So I'll have to follow up with you, certainly to get your answer. I think my seatmate, Representative Ormsby, who chairs the Appropriations Committee, could be helpful in helping us navigate that, as well as I serve on the capital budget when we're looking at how we're trying to build those out. It's just not, it's like housing. It's like not a snap of the finger. So I look forward to following up with you and the Downtown Spokane Partnership to chat about how we can do more there. The questions that I would pose back to this group, because I know we have a lot of solutions-oriented folks around the table. One, specifically, I do believe, and it's not rapid rehousing, rapid acquisition of properties. There will be more pots. I do think Spokane is primed for that. I tried to work with a private entity. We brought, World Relief, Catholic Charities, VOA, YWCA, others to try and find some properties. It didn't come to fruition, and that was just kind of out of frustration of trying to move things forward. I would love the help identifying properties in our area, whether it be apartment complexes that are maybe a little bit run down, whether it be hotels that we could potentially purchase, where we could come in. There's some great models out there. We've seen them for the private side, the old Days Inn. We see that same company went across the West Coast in Oregon. They brought like 9,000 units on in record time. And we can find some of this housing that works for 1 and 2 people. And the question around the model too, I am just floored. I'd love to see, how do we get a commitment? It is desperate times when a VOA has a Hope House model that has a success rate where people are in to the shelter housing, they're moved up to transitional housing, they're working on job placement, but then they say, city, county, state, we are desperate. We don't have enough operating dollars. How do we find solutions around that so we don't even go backwards there? So those are the 2 questions I would have. Please, if you can help me find some property that we can use these new fundings online. I've connected with a bunch of folks. I just talked, Governor Gregoire was mentioned. She's leading this charge for this huge increase in funding for this rapid acquisition, and I'd love to make sure that Spokane doesn't miss out on another round.
We're all thinking about that. I think Susan, you had raised your hand with a comment, and
No, just I was just going to say, I guess I'm kind of from the old school where work is valuable, right? Like having skin in the game builds character. And when we see the struggles of our homeless family, I used to feel that, maybe there are things that we can give them to do to actually have pride in the community that they live, in hopes that their circumstances would improve because we grow. So I think I want to say old school in that. And I agree with what the chief said in that, there's value in owning our community. And I sit before you today as a grieving mother of a young adult son who's come home from New Zealand and suffering some severe mental illness that we were not aware of, and he is homeless. And I have to tell you, it's changed my life. It's changed my view on what makes someone struggle. And not that I was not compassionate or empathetic before, because anyone who knows me would tell you that I am. But when we sit here and say it is complicated, it is so much more complicated. And as much as I encourage my son to do his part, and I will match. There are just days when that's not a possibility. And so it is a big problem, and it is going to get worse. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse because our young adults are suffering and our children behind them are suffering. And mental illness comes from trauma in a lot of cases. And so I guess the only reason I wanted to share that is because I don't have the answers. I have a lot of prayer. I have a lot of hope. But I think that we have to rally as the adults in the room, rally harder. And it's not just about, yes, it's about putting a roof over their heads so that they feel safe, but we have to get to how do we help them find their self again. And so, I don't know, as much as we're looking for funding, you know, from legislators asking us, how do we find funding? Yeah, throwing money is not just the answer, but thank you.
Susan, this is Jim. I have a brief follow-up question for you. I have a relative also that we ran into a bureaucracy that doesn't allow you to help a lot of times. Can you tell us if you had experiences like if I was going to help my relative pay for rent, she would lose her Social Security disability income eligibility. So basically, my helping her would hurt her. Did you find that same experience with your situation?
I'm not particularly in that situation. I think the only thing that helped me to help or be helping my son is that luckily he put me on the list of family who was allowed to speak to his healthcare providers. I was allowed to talk to the hospital when he was admitted. Had he not done that, your hands are tied because they're adults. They're adults in age. It's very complicated in that I think, where do you draw the line between a person's right to have their life and their right to have their privacy and make their choices when we, as a society, don't believe that they're in that capacity to do? It's very much back to that. Where does the right to a person's individual journey and rights belong? And that's a big question. Yeah.
Susan, that's why I asked the question earlier that how has it touched your life? Because anytime you get a group together the size, now we have 3 of us who are all kind of speaking to that issue on a very personal family level. And I've always found that when we have difficult conversations like this, it's important to make it safe to speak about those personal connections as a way of really getting deeply into the issue. And it does bring that empathy and that compassion into the discussion. And Yvette, you were raising your hand.
Thank you for sharing your story, Susan. I know it's challenging. I know there are others around the table who've had that same concern. And, you know, it's like we encourage our kids to drive in these cars. They might be older, but electric cars. And we want them to have, you know, understanding of what it is to save the climate. But if you're driving through Nevada, in the middle of Nevada, and you don't have a place to service your hybrid Prius, you end up, you know, being stuck. And I know my son has been stuck, and it's a real big problem because when you don't have money, you know, what do? You know, in the middle of nowhere. And so he's had that same issue, and he's an honor student. He actually worked across the hallway for the university, but he just had differences of opinion on a greenhouse that he's helping to build with his contractor boss, and he just got disgusted, decided, I'm going to go to Las Vegas and have a good time, and on the way back his car broke down and he got into trouble. And so I'm having to deal with similar issues. You know, it's like the instantaneous homeless you don't know what to do with young people. They don't know how to survive out there in the middle of nowhere. I'm glad I grew up on 4-H and Girl Scouts, so it kind of helped me to be smart about how to survive. But we just don't teach our young people survival skills, and I think that's major part of the homeless issue. Myself, I have a daughter. I thought I was going to have kind of an empty nest, and I just had another 2 more quarters to get him out of the house, and it would be my place. But it hasn't happened yet because my daughter was living with her boyfriend, and their mother's house was was basically sold by a landlord who could make more money selling the house rather than renting it out. So I've got a new little family in my household back, and that's okay. But the thing about it is we all pull together and we know how to survive, but we haven't really taught this new generation how to do that. And I think that that's been a challenge. But I have still concerns about, the skin in the game concept. We have like $900,000 or $600,000 being spent by the Realtors Association to influence the purchase of land here in the county. And, all that money for the last 2 or 3 years could have been spent on renovating downtown hotels to handle the houseless, the homeless. And, we don't have means in terms of corporate finance reform. So I hope, Marcus and Mr. Holy, that you will contemplate campaign finance and get those folks that are influencing the real estate in our community to put some skin in the game to build these facilities so that they're meeting the needs of our homeless. And I think if we don't do something about that, it's unconscionable and it's not right. But anyway, that's my concern about the homeless issues is we have a lot of money being spent for each of our city council members, maybe not all of them, but anybody who takes money ought to be figuring out solutions to setting up a solution to this problem. So thank you.
Okay. And Denny, this triggered some thoughts on your part.
Jeff, Marcus, good to see you. One of the first things I learned in meeting with Ozzy here is that their jail is basically one of the larger mental health institutes in Spokane. It points out how critical that is. But I think you guys have seen from listening to us how important mental health treatment is, how important drug and alcohol. Housing is just one aspect of it. If you're able to get housing for them, that's only the first step. So many people that have gotten their house end up losing it or not doing very well because they didn't get the second, third, and fourth steps, which will help them with their mental health, will help them with jobs. As Jeff, as you know, the Catholic Charities has put together some amazing apartments, the havens that we have out here, that have just been doing just that, where they have case workers, mental health, as well as a job, and they allow these homeless people to have not only homes, but to be able to take the next step, and that is get employment, be able to mentally handle the changes. Because the reason they've gotten to the position that they're homeless is not because there's just a few homes left, but because of the problems that they've had in their marriages, in their jobs, in their health care, in their mental situation. And those are the things we have to address hand in glove with giving them a new home. But I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and you go, guys.
And
Can I respond to one thing really quick to that, Sulani? Yeah, I just want to say one thing we can get behind, getting a little echo here, but one thing I think we can get behind, I met with Amber Waldriff and Michael Cathcart with the Northeast Community Center. That old library, there's an opportunity. They're seeking some capital funding from the state to have a behavioral health center. And so those are the type of projects that I think are important, and I hope we can all get behind. And I'll communicate with Senator Holy and our legislative team, but I hope we can get some support on the ground for those types of facilities opening up in communities where they're needed. So I just wanted to put that on radar because I know we're looking for some solutions tonight. And I think that that's using a library that's set up pretty good after touring it to be a behavioral health facility, I think is a great idea. And I'm glad the Northeast Community Center brought that to me.
Okay, I got 2 more people with hands raised. Sheriff Ozzy, you could have a minute, and I'll give a minute to Pastor Lang.
All right, in that minute, one of the things we rarely talk about is what Denny just mentioned, the drivers. What's driving the homeless issue? We have a situation where employers are begging for people to come to work. So it's not an economic issue, it's not a job loss issue. One of the tragic parts about this is our foster kids. When a foster kid ages out of the house, they have nowhere to go. And during my walkabouts around town, I've talked to a lot of kids that are homeless, and they all have the same statement. Sheriff, do you really think I want to be homeless? I aged out. I have nowhere to go. So you have to start looking at what is actually driving this, not the housing aspect alone. It is what is truly driving this, so we can help correct that.
Troy?
We have generational trauma, right, Susan? We have generations of violence and racism. We have to have a generational determination. It can't fluctuate wildly from election season to election season. We, the adults in the room, have to have the determination to do it for the long haul, for the good of our children and our grandchildren. And because we're selfishly wanting our cities to thrive, our businesses to thrive, and if we don't have the determination, and if we don't have the long-term generational funding to fight back against the things that have made us so unhappy, and our children so sick, and our society so sick, we won't make a difference. This is where we need to put our money.
Lead into where we need to come to a close. This is not the end. This is the beginning of what we hope will be a longer and more robust conversation. I think I'm going to give one last chance. I can squeeze in a minute for any of you who didn't have a chance to say something in this last section. Any last words?
Can I just touch on what the sheriff said for our youth? Because there's a great model, and I'm sharing this so the representatives, the senator, and our council can hear, and they probably are aware of it. You know, we've opened that youth homeless shelter in Spokane. It's not getting used. We've saw that to the degree it should be based on the paper. But there's a great model out of Canada, or now out of the UK and Britain, called the 4-year model. And it addresses just what the sheriff is talking about. It allows youth up to the age 25 to remain in these long-term transitional settings, and they can be institutional, they can be scattered, because we don't want people coming out of maybe juvenile detention or those places going back into what looks like another detention place. But it provides training, education, life skills, and those kind of things for those very invisible homeless people that we talk about. So it's a model that maybe we want to entertain and investigate. It's called the 4-year model.
One real quick. I just checked with Chud because I thought I remember this. The Hutton Settlement, when they graduate kids out of their facility, they keep them as an alumni program till they're 25. And as Yvette and Susan can testify, sometimes those kids come back and they need backup. And kicking them out of foster care at 18 is truly unfair, a big contributor to homelessness. So, complex issue, poverty, lack of affordable housing, physical and mental health problems, addictions, community and family breakdown, all those are parts of the homelessness problem. On the other side, there's issues of public safety, public health, damage and theft, and all the things that brings with it to those property owners and stores that are trying to make a living as well. So it's not easy, it's complicated, we have to face it. This is not the end.
We will be having, I think, a lot more discussions about this and other issues, and with the good graces of Spokane Talks Media and sponsors like the gentleman I want to introduce right now, Mike Araveshi, as our project sponsor. I want to really thank all of you for showing up tonight, all of you for being so civil with each other, regardless of what political side of the spectrum you might lie. And I want to say that we are all here because this gentleman to my left, Mike, who loves America deeply, and maybe he'll tell you a little piece of his story, but loves America deeply, wanted us to have this discussion left and right. So I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thank you. My name is Mike Gavarecci. I want to thank everyone, participating in this event. I want to thank, Kent, with Spokane Talks, putting effort, and Sulani, Jim, and rest of the crew for being here and making this, event, to possible. The reason, I want to actually do this is just to remind us that, what we have as a country. I talked to somebody just a few days ago from my home country, Iran, and he told me, and please, pay attention. He told me, appreciate America. And that's a lot to say. That's a lot. Appreciate America. Where we come from as immigrant to this land of opportunity, freedom, and democracy, I want to do my share to let you, that this country was handed to you. You were born to this. I walked to this nation over 35 years ago. And now you have this, beautiful nation. Try to preserve it. Try to, see whatever you can do to keep this, flag up, this country to go forward. I told Kent, a few years ago, this nation is young. We need to give America a chance. When we are united, and when we are, solidified, we can, preserve, our freedom and democracy. And just the quote, a famous quote, I know we all heard, and I want to just, read it one more time, is by JFK, is, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And I know you're watching online, but this is, is to all, politicians, across the country. Do what you can do for this country. Put politics aside and come united. And I encourage highly President Biden to reach, to President Trump, and let's, have, a direct conversation and see what we can, solve, our problems, and we go forward. Thank you so much.